I'm about to introduce you guys to a highly touted researcher into the topic of ELEs, that's end of life experience. This is not my interview. This is an interview on another podcast. I fail to remember, but I'll pin the podcast to this video. But yeah, Dr. Christopher Kerr has been studying basically death or ELEs for basically half of my life. He's a pioneer in the subject in America. I've heard of him since 2020, 2021. Ever since I've heard of him, man, like the amount of wisdom that comes from just listening to his experience with death is astonishing. But without further ado, let's get into it.
So it's always evolving. I can tell you how it started, basically, if that would help.
Sure.
And kind of bring you along. So basically, I went to medical school residency and not exactly trained to care for dying patients. And it was really, when I got here, kind of by accident, I was just moonlighting at hospice. It was really my non-physician colleagues who were very attuned to the death that I wasn't, which is, I looked at the patient objectively, measurable things, examinable things, images, and they were much more aware of the experiential side of dying. And what I learned very quickly was that there was a dying we see, and then there was the dying that the patient was experiencing, that the nurses in particular could prognosticate or anticipate where somebody was in their dying process based on what they were experiencing, in particular when it came to these kind of dreams and visions. So I can't say I understood it. I found it a little off-putting, but eventually I realized that regardless of the etiology or the source, whether I could prove or disprove really didn't matter. It mattered to the patient. It was overwhelmingly comforting and mattered also to their loved ones. So shoot ahead, I'm trying to teach it to young doctors that, hey, what the patients are saying matters. And I was inevitably challenged, well, there's no evidence for it. And the funny thing is, it's always been talked about across time and throughout cultures, different cultures. This is just a very well described. It's in the Bible. It's in Plato's Republic. Indigenous people talk about it today, etc. So I started to do a series of studies, and just to prove what we already knew, basically, that this was happening. And one of the things we did in all our studies is we screened people for confusion. So these are university-approved studies. You have to be cognitively intact. You have to be aware of your faculties, and you have to sign consents. There's witnesses, and a lot of these patients we've filmed. So we've now, over these many years, have probably 1,500 patients and families, and that's how we started doing this. So we, up front, addressed the medical criticism that these patients were confused, medicated, deoxygenated, etc. And in fact, when you see them on film, and there's 3 documentaries on this topic. One's on Netflix. You'll see that these patients are not only sound like you and I, they actually have heightened acuity, insight, seem to have this great understanding. So just to set the stage, this is separate from delirium or confusional states, which are very common in the dying process. And people can go back and forth. But the patients in our study are cognitively intact.
And I think that's an important point to hit, because I've witnessed from people that I've seen comment online from just some of the conversations that I've had, they go right to delirium, they go right to the confusion aspect to just dismiss it. And that is an interesting balancing line. We have the scientific approach of evidence-based, and then you have these things that, I guess, at least when you first came into it, that just weren't quote unquote provable. So going into it, did you believe in it, or you were just more curious, or lack of belief even?
No, I think I was probably discomforted by it. Medicine, the science of medicine has, outstripped its art. And we live in a world where evidence seems to be required before you can have belief. And medicine's, discomforted by the mind, okay with the brain. So it and spirituality in general. It places us in a perspective, in a position where you have to have some assumption of, you don't have to know for it to be. You just have to, it is what it is. And again, it comes down to the fact that it's not about us. What the patient says is what matters. What the patient experiences is what matters. So I basically got to this point where I didn't understand it, but I certainly learned to have reverence for it. It mattered. And dying is an interesting process in that it's really defined by progressive sleep. Like you don't go see patients on a Monday and you're talking to them and they all of a sudden
this is where it starts to go into a little bit of the process.
So in the process of dying is this pull towards deeper sleep. Sleep architecture changes. Dreams change in terms of vividness, how experiential they are. And of course, dying is this process where your vantage point changes. It changes your perspective and your perception. You're not worried about your bills. You're reflecting on life and the things that matter. So there's all this kind of fertile ground or foundation which to have these inner experiences. So you're in this kind of deep sleep dream state, and you're understandably reflective on life and what mattered. And the things that matter come to surface to people, and those tend to be people who they've loved.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like you just explained the big why of my podcast. I think
So you heard it then. He basically just put everybody on game to the fact that modern medicine don't have the capacity to understand what death really is, because they don't look for it. They only look for the brain, but they don't look for the mind. And he also was letting you guys know that there's an actual process. Nurses can tell when somebody's going to die because there's a process. The amount of sleep that person is having, when that person starts having dreams or starts having visions, or if somebody that is in a vegetable state just automatically just has consciousness again. It happens on many occasions. That's how you know that the process of death is taking place. And it's so interesting because he talked about the physicians. The physicians themselves were the ones that did not have the belief that these people are experiencing extraordinary things in this process of death. Extraordinary things. And he hasn't gotten to a lot of the things I want to talk about yet, but it's things like the people that they see when they're dreaming are only people that passed away before them. That's interesting, right? Only the people that have passed away. Nobody that's living. We got a lot more to talk about, y'all. We got a lot more to talk about. But like he was saying, the actual process is something that you can all see for yourselves. Something that everybody can practice. Somebody off the street can go into a hospital and understand if somebody's in the process of dying or not just by asking questions. But hey, y'all, this is just part 2. It's just part 2. I got plenty more coming for you. But hey, buckle up, dog. It's time to get real. It's time to get real about this.